Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Subtext Podcast Archives. These are the long-lost episodes of the Subtext that were originally produced between 2015 and 2017. In 2018, the Subtext moved to American Theater Magazine, and we've been producing the pod there monthly ever since. These time capsules are being shared here in their entirety, including plenty of outdated references and advertisements for events far in the past. If you enjoy them, please subscribe to the current podcast feed for the Subtext or stream new episodes on the website for American Theater Magazine. Thank you for listening. I was sitting down to write this introduction when I was reading something my friend Larissa Fasthorse wrote on Facebook. She stated much more eloquently what I was trying to articulate myself. If you haven't listened to my interview with Larissa from this past May, go do that now and then come back to this. She gave me permission to share with you what she wrote, so here it is. These are Larissa's words. Life is a crazy ride, my friends. My life is going well professionally and personally, but I always have stuff in my brain that tries to take me down. Jealousy is something that I have to fight. I live in a world of constant competitions. I am genuinely happy for friends that get opportunities I don't, but I'm also genuinely unhappy that it wasn't me. And it's not like I want to take it away from them, I just want it too. Then I beat myself up for being disappointed. But as I write this, I suspect others feel the same way. One thing age has taught me is how similar we all are. So if you're someone who feels bad about being jealous, know that I'm there with you. Today I took a break from a rewrite and ended up watching ballet videos. This is something I do when I'm feeling insecure. Ballet, despite all its insanity, was home to me for the majority of my life. I have ballet dreams when I'm stressed or scared. Sometimes they are anxiety dreams where I'm going into a dance I haven't done in a long time, but usually they are wonderful dreams where I am good and strong and in control. In my dreams, I'm a natural turner and find the perfect calm of multiple pirouettes that eluded me the majority of my actual career. In life, I was a jumper. I went across the floor with the men because the women didn't cover enough ground for me. I wasn't a technician, but I could fly. Today, I watched the ballet video and my whole body remembered what it felt like to soar through the air. My muscles and nerves pulsed with the exhilaration of flight. Immediately, my brain told me, "You'll never do that again." My heart contracted with pain. This is not new information, but it hit me hard today. Today, when things are going so well. Today, my mind made sure I felt the loss of what only a few people on the planet have done. It's been a good day on paper. I'm cruising on a rewrite and got a lot of business sorted out. But even good days have their challenges that no one would know from the outside. So, just in case you're having one of those days, I wanted to let you know that I'm there with you on this too. Thanks, Larissa. I needed that. Welcome to the Subtext, a podcast where I talk to playwrights who are much more successful than me as I try to navigate my way into the American theater. While we are here at the top of the show, let me remind you that it would mean a lot to us if you could share this podcast with people you think can benefit from these discussions. Playwrights, students, creative people needing to commiserate. Send them to our page on iTunes and tell them to subscribe. If you have a moment, please go to our iTunes page and rate the show and leave a comment. I'd really appreciate the support. Moving on. This month, my guest is Tira Palmquist, whose play And Then They Fell with Bremer Street Theater runs through September 22nd at Atwater Village Theater in Los Angeles. I've known Tira for a couple years, but I've never had the chance to speak with her one-on-one like this, and lately I've been seeing her name pop up all over the place, and I mean that in a good way. When Bremer Street announced they'd be producing this play and all the proceeds from ticket sales would be going to My Friend's Place, a Los Angeles-based outreach organization dedicated to helping homeless kids, I felt like I had to talk to her. Here's my interview with Tira.
Measuring my kitchen.
So you have 90 things you're juggling right now, it sounds like.
Mm-hmm.
Two new plays, one being workshop one being produced.
Mm-hmm.
You live in Orange County,
I do.
right? That's the to me. That's the infamous thing about you. When
It feels a little infamous.
when I was introduced to who you were before we actually met in person, it was Tira's this great playwright, and she lives in Orange County and just drives to LA for everything. And I'm like, is this person insane?
Sometimes I feel a little insane.
I guess that's the first question. Are you insane?
I might be insane. But here's the truth of the matter. We live in Orange County because my husband teaches at UC Irvine, and it's cheaper for us to live there because we live in the faculty housing. We bought a house in faculty housing.
Yeah.
The Egghead Ghetto, as we call it.
Yeah.
And when we moved here, I didn't really have I came along, I was a spousal hire. I worked at UCI for a while, but I really didn't want to just be teaching composition in the English department. And when I realized that, oh yes, there are some opportunities in Orange County, but there are more opportunities in Los Angeles, I just sort of went, shrug, I guess I have to drive to Los Angeles and listen to a lot of books in the car. So
Is that how you pass the time?
I do indeed. I listen to books.
What are you listening to at the moment?
I'm sort of in a sci-fi rabbit hole.
Oh, yeah?
So I'm listening to a kind of a terrible book right now. Okay, it's not totally terrible. I'll just say that for a while I was listening to a lot of really fantastic books. I just finished N.K. Jemison's second book, The Obelisk Gate, which is fantastic. And I sort of needed a little break from N.K. Jemisin, even though she's fantastic. There's a book I'm not going to mention the author's name just because in case we're actually recording right now, I don't want to malign this author. I was like, oh, that's an interesting title for a book. And the audio does not sound terrible, so I'll give it a shot. And it's really light and fluffy nonsense. And there's everything about it that feels like it was written in order to eventually be turned into an episodic television show.
Oh, yeah.
Like each of these chapters are these weird little nuggets of, okay, that's an episode, that's a 45-minute episode of television right there. So that's kind of nonsense.
And every 44 pages is a commercial break or something.
Exactly.
Right? Whatever. Are you a sci-fi junkie?
I am a recent convert to sci-fi, yeah. I never really listened to or read any sci-fi before, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years ago. I mean, I really like sci-fi movies. I'm a Star Trek fan. I really like Star Wars, all of that. I really liked Firefly. But I hadn't really read a lot of sci-fi until my husband and a friend of ours had been deep into Ian M. Banks, who's a fantastic Scottish writer who spent half of his life was writing sci-fi, and those books are all published under Ian M. Banks, and half of his bibliography is non-sci-fi, which is published under Ian Banks. So don't confuse the two, apparently. And
don't confuse the two exact same person?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know why they're published under different names, but okay. It was his publisher who decided it needed to happen. And they said, oh, we really feel you would like Ian M. Banks. He's smart, he's funny, he's inventive. And I thought, well, what the hell? Why not?
Yeah.
And I started listening to him, and I was sold, like within the first 2 chapters.
What hooked you?
What hooked me is that there wasn't anything that we have this, or I had this idea about sci-fi as taking itself very seriously or too seriously rather, full of a lot of sciencey sounding jargon and basically being a war story set in space, etc. Ian M. Banks does these incredible world builds, and he's fairly irreverent, and he's funny, and he has really he has a lot of fun with things like his ship names. There's AIs that live in these ships, and they give themselves names, so they have names like just a washing instruction, just a washing instruction in the washing machine of life, or something like that. And so there's a kind of irreverence and playfulness of his books that I find, and smartness and gorgeous writing. So,
do you ever write in genre?
I've been accused of writing cli-fi.
What cli-fi?
Science fiction that has to do with climate change.
Oh,
because of my play Age of Bees, which takes place, after the collapse, after all the bees are gone, and then my play 2 Degrees, which has to do with climate change. And I was like, I write cli-fi? Oh, I guess I do. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I guess you need 2. One, right? One is just sort of a foray, and then 2, there you are.
But other than that, I don't necessarily see myself as. I never thought of myself as. I don't know why we have a weird idea about writing in particular genres. I don't know why that seems like many people do.
Right.
Like feeling that if you write in a particular genre, you're being, you're in a little box or closet somewhere. I had this conversation with my students. I teach at the Orange County High School of the Arts, and I'm teaching a class right now in young adult fiction, specifically LGBTQ plus fiction for young adults, and how young adult as a marketing campaign feels very limiting to some authors. And one author in particular wrote about.
You mean in the sense that you get pegged as
you get
writing
pegged
that,
as
and that's all you can write?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that being somehow less than writing real adult fiction. If you're writing young adult fiction, it's an unfortunate categorization for some people. And I think that that's too bad.
Because it's less than.
It feels less than.
Yeah.
And so this author was writing about her book, that her publisher, her editor and publisher decided to publish it as a young adult work, even though she had not written it specifically for young adults. But they decided that would be a good opportunity for them to market it such. And then her friends were like, "Oh, we're so sorry."
Oh, really?
Like, "Oh, that sucks that your book is being marketed as YA."
Oh, except, do you realize how incredibly impossible it is to get a book published?
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
So how about congratulations? It's fucking amazing.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's unfortunate.
I struggle. I am not I'm not a fan of any specific genre, and so when I start to have ideas that start to dip their toe in different things, I get extremely intimidated because I know I don't live in these worlds. I don't live in horror. I don't live in zombie. I don't live in the future, in outer space. All these things, I don't live there in my mind, and I don't consume this stuff. So I'm afraid to write it because I feel like it will just be completely dismantled by fans of the genre. And I wrote. I had an idea that involved time travel a couple years ago that I wrote. And I was thinking of not writing it because, as one of my professors in grad school said, time travel fiction is the junk food for writers. you know it's a mistake, but you can't resist.
Right.
So you do it, and I fell into it, and I ended up writing a play that involved time travel, but the reveal of the time travel wasn't until, like, my trick for me being able to write it was that the play, 90% of the play exists in our time, and you don't know that time travel is a framework for the play until the end of the play.
Right.
So you don't have time to really dismantle it while you're watching it.
Clever.
You're essentially
nice.
watching a straightforward narrative play with that pulls the rug out from under you at the end.
Right.
Unless you and I've done a couple readings of this, and I've had people who are deep into sci-fi genre knew on page 7 what was going on because they're so attuned. The tiniest breadcrumb I left, they were like
picked up immediately.
They were like, "Oh, I get it. this happened and he's him and that's that. Okay. And I was like, so I felt so ashamed of myself as a writer.
That's funny.
So I don't know if I'll ever jump back into that. I need to be so inspired again that.
Yeah. That's fair. My husband frequently, when I'm starting a new play, he'll say, "So are there zombies in it?" No, there are no zombies in this play.
Does he read your work?
Yeah, he does. He frequently doesn't read it until I've completed at least the first draft, if not the second draft. And he, because he's an actor first, he tends to look at a text from that angle. And so he'll oftentimes say, "Man, this is an impossible line."
Oh, yeah.
or okay, hold, just hear me out. Because I think that, if he'll give a little adjustments, like, I think that this would be easier to say, and a lot of times that commentary is pretty helpful. But if I get that too early,
right,
it can be limiting. He's also really good at giving some fairly big dramaturgical, like understanding the arc of a piece and saying, well, hold on, then this, I'm not sure where this scene fits in the whole scheme of things. But I try not to take advantage of him too much because I know he's pretty busy.
Right.
And sometimes I like him to be surprised about what I'm doing.
Is he able to provide critical feedback? Is he able to, do you have the relationship where he can say the hard things to you?
Yeah, absolutely. But also he is a really good, I find that he's a really good resource for just talking through problems in a play. Like working through a potential change, even if his response is just sitting and nodding and listening and being like, oh, okay. Have you solved your problem now?
Right.
Good, fantastic. Can I go back to what I'm doing? But it's really nice that we approach theater, or that we're in two different realms in the theater. It's because he's a dialect coach and a voice coach and text coach. We don't step on each other's toes professionally, which is really nice.
He fills in the space you might not
exactly
have occupied in your writing.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. Do you have anybody read your first draft? Generally?
It depends. I have some friends that I trust enough. What I prefer to do on early drafts is to be in a room with actors as I'm workshopping. There comes a point where I really need that outside eye of a really good dramaturg to help me step back from it, because I get caught in the weeds of it, right? I mean, I get so hemmed in by my own play sometimes that I can't step back and really see the whole thing, sweep of it. And I've been really lucky to work with some great dramaturgs who have really been able to say, hold on, wait, just a second, I'm going to ask a very inconvenient question right now. But it's like, oh, you're right. I'm sorry. You're correct.
Yeah.
But that's an invaluable resource. And I think that that's the best thing that dramaturgs can do, is be that outside eye to very gently nudge you in a particular direction without being prescriptive about it. So, I mean, in general, I've been lucky to at least be working on a script in the context of, well, like the moving arts thing, working on a script in the context of a larger span of time, stepping in with actors occasionally. There's nothing better, I think, than just hearing your work read by actors, and the way that reveals both possibilities of what it can be, but also revealing the problems that you couldn't have seen because you were either, like I said, either too close or thinking about other issues or problems.
Right, and what's great about the moving arts Mad Lab is that there's a structure set up for the entirety of the process, for the whole soup to nuts
Absolutely.
process. So you have that sort of that support from the beginning. You know, so you want your first draft read by actors in a room that you can sit there and really hear it for the first time. That's there.
Exactly.
And then as you move down the process, you've got more available to you. A director and then a dramaturg and more actors. And you can replace actors if you choose to.
Exactly.
Yeah, big shout out to the Moving Arts Mad Lab. I did it last year.
It's just so great.
Yeah.
And I've really appreciated first just that the structure of the deadline. We all know how good that is. And inevitably I set myself deadlines. Completely fictitious deadlines, like I would like to have this draft done so that I can submit it to XYZ.
Right.
But there's something even more cute about an actual deadline of, oh, shit, there's going to be actors in the room. So
yeah, you owe them something.
you absolutely, you really do. But it's also nice in that context to have said, you know, have things in brackets like, and here's the scene where XYZ is going to happen. That will happen later. I also really, really appreciated that they provided a really great team for us. My dramaturg, Matthew Quinlan, has been fantastic.
Right. I know Matthew well.
He very quietly, just asks exactly the right questions. Like,
Well, everything Matthew does is done quietly.
well, yes, but I felt really lucky being able to work with him. But then also that there's a flexibility. So the fact that I was able to suggest my own director for the project, someone I've worked with before. Not because I didn't trust them to come up with a wonderful director, but Lem had asked me, and I said, well, as a matter of fact, there is somebody I would like to work with if that's possible. I've been introduced to some great actors through that, but then being able to, for example, in the last phase when we had the 15 hours of work with actors around a table, it was great to draw both on the actors that they had brought to the table and to say, oh, but I would like to see have this other person at the table as well. So it's been pretty great.
Do you often write with leaving blank spots to come back to later?
I sometimes do. I mean, I think it's inevitable that you will have like this inkling of, I think that there needs to be a scene happening here in which we discover XYZ. Sometimes, though, I'll just keep charging forward, having written that note in a pad of paper or something. And I'm pretty completionist about things. This is one of my failures. Like being a completionist about, for example, having to finish an entire trilogy of books, even though I don't particularly like the books. It's like,
for example, the book that you're listening to in your car, you're not enjoying, but you have to get through it.
Exactly. It's like, oh crap, I must get to the end. And there are rare times when I just simply can't do it. But I feel that way about my writing. It's like if there are gaps, I feel compelled to figure out those gaps. Even if I know it's just a placeholder scene. It's like, well, I'm just going to try this out for right now. And that tends to work for me. But
I feel incapable of going forward without the blank spot filled in. I feel like I have to stop and move away and do something else. I'll write something else. I'll work on another play, or I'll revise another play. And then I'll come back, and if I can't fill in that blank spot, I won't keep writing the play. And usually my process before I start allows me to barrel through, even if it's just I get every blank spot filled, even if it's not well.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
it's okay, it's passable, but it gets me through, and that's the way I get to the finish line.
Exactly.
And I fill in the colors more later. So usually my blank spot is filled in rather thin, in a rather thin way, and then I have to come back and add a lot of depth and color to it later. But at least I've done enough to be able to move forward.
Oh, absolutely. I feel the same way. The other day I referred to playwriting as, to a certain degree, like scratching off a lottery ticket. You know what I mean? You have the lottery ticket and everything is, that silver sheen, and you scratch off a little at a time, and eventually the numbers are revealed to you.
Right, yeah.
And I feel that that's when each pass of a scene, it's like, I thought that it was about this, but we scratched off more. And it's like, no, it is not 10, it's 20.
I actually like that metaphor a lot, except the way I'm thinking of it right now is I've had experiences where I've started to write a thing that I thought was a great idea. And I scratched off the number that I needed to be a 4, and it's a 9, and I was like, oh, it's a 9.
Oh,
yeah,
God
I shouldn't do this, and then I throw it away, which is what you do with scratchers.
Right.
You realize this isn't like you just scratch enough to see if you won,
Right.
and then you just toss it.
My other metaphor for writing, it's like driving in fog. Like eventually what's down the road becomes revealed, but for a long time you're driving down this fairly scary road in which you're not really sure if you're headed in the right direction. But
Yeah, you only get the couple feet right in front of you.
Exactly.
You're only sure of that.
Exactly.
Yeah. And your high beams do not help.
Not at all.
I don't know what the metaphor is in writing for high beams.
For high beams? I think maybe the metaphor for high beams is worrying more? I don't know.
Yeah, don't push it.
Don't push it.
Yeah. Just stick with what you can observe.
Yeah.
And trust that you'll get there.
And I absolutely, I think that there's a time, you were talking about that there are moments when you just have to step away, and I think that that's absolutely true. I think the worst time to write is when you're being super hard on yourself. When I start to hate a scene, like I'm actually hating my own writing, it's like, oh shit, I really need to stop right now, because when you're in that mood and you start to tinker, that's when you start to break things in an unhelpful way. I think there's ways to break things helpfully, then there are ways to break things unhelpfully. And when you're being super hard on yourself as a writer, you just need to step back and wash the dishes or read a book or go for a walk or something. Otherwise, you're just going to, like, tailspin. You're just going to become this unhelpful hurricane of self-loathing, which will inevitably result in you doing something super unhelpful with your writing. So,
how did you get into this in the first place?
Well, first I was an actor. When I was an undergraduate, I got my BA in theater, and I really thought I was going to be an actor. And at the time when I really thought I was going to be an actor, I was also writing poetry, and I was getting much more love from my poetry teachers. I was studying with Jory Graham and James Galvin at the University of Iowa. I was in the undergraduate poetry workshop, which I didn't realize was such a big deal at the time. It was fun for me to do. I really liked writing. And I was trying to get into MFA programs as an actor, but I was like just being told weird things like, you're short. And I was like, what? What kind of fucking nonsense is that?
I am? Actors
really?
can't be short.
And at the very same time, my teacher Jory said, you should definitely apply to MFA poetry, MFA programs in poetry. And I thought, what the fuck? That's a thing? Okay. So I did, and I got into a bunch. And my husband...
And you did this immediately after undergrad?
Well, I took a year off. My husband was on... We were dating. We were engaged to be married. He had one more year of school to finish. I finished a year before him. And so he applied to MFA programs in acting. I applied to MFA programs in poetry. We both got into a school together in our respective programs.
But the same school?
Same school.
Wow.
UC Irvine.
Mm-hmm.
And so at that point, I was like resigned not to be in the theater. I was like, well, not resigned, but I was like, oh, yay. I actually love writing and I enjoy poetry, so that's the thing I'm going to do. But the whole time I was getting my MFA in poetry, I was still in shows. People would say, oh, you can act. You should be in this show.
Mm-hmm.
So I was in a couple of MFA directors' projects. And it makes total sense then that these two worlds would collide for me, that it was just a little bit of a course adjustment for me, that I went from writing poetry to writing plays.
Mm-hmm.
And it felt very natural to me at the time when that adjustment happened. And I realized that I knew a lot about how a play works because I had been in the play from the inside,
Mm-hmm.
and I had built props, and I'd worked on set, and I'd been a stage manager, and I'd built costumes, and I'd been a dresser. So all of those things together helped me to understand a lot of how a play is made, how it works. And I think that there's something that is a natural compunction for me, that I am drawn to narrative.
Mm-hmm.
I could see that in my poetry as well. There was a kind of a narrative thread to my poetry, so it totally makes sense that I would be drawn into this as a form.
So did you go through the entirety of grad school as a poet,
Mm-hmm.
graduate with an MFA,
Mm-hmm.
and then transition, or was this happening sort of simultaneously?
Well, to a certain degree, I took one class. I took one independent study in playwriting, just as an experiment. And I thought, well, that was interesting. And I really didn't, I didn't think anything of it. And then when we moved to Columbus, Ohio, a colleague of my husband's found out that I was a poet and wanted to know if I would be interested in getting involved with a multidisciplinary performance group that she was an artistic director for. And I thought, well, that sounds like a really fun experiment for me, writing for performance that isn't a play, and writing for writing poetry on stage is what I thought
Mm-hmm.
of it. But the more I did that, the more I found myself wanting to return to narrative rather than writing more experimental work on stage. And that was that transition that really sealed the deal for me.
Do you write poetry at all anymore?
Not really.
Do you find it manifesting in your playwriting?
Absolutely, I find it in that respect, that every once in a while there will be some lyrical moment.
Mm-hmm. Does it happen unintentionally?
Well,
Or you find
I think
or
I'd
do you
be
find a
lying if I
moment
said-
that calls for it?
yeah, I think that that's more true. I think I'd be lying if I said it just sort of happens magically and then I realize it. It's that when here's the thing. I'm not so much a writer who writes a lot of monologues. It just doesn't come naturally to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, man, that a monologue has to be super fucking good for me to be sold on it. And in the play that's happening just down the street, there were moments when I found that the monologue was necessary.
Mm-hmm.
And it was at that point that I realized I was like, oh, right, I know how to do this. Oh, my God, it's a poem. I'm writing a poem for this.
Mm-hmm.
And then I allowed myself, when I realized that that's what was necessary in the moment, that I allowed myself to indulge in that.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, I don't think that I necessarily default to that in my writing. I'm conscious of how people speak, and I'm conscious of finding the right register,
Mm-hmm.
the right diction, the right turn of phrase. Of course, we all are, but
I think some people, I don't think we all are. I think I see a lot of plays and I read a lot of plays where the playwright isn't particularly interested in the sounds of the words.
Right.
I think there's a lot. I think the words can be just in service to a plot, oftentimes.
Sure.
And I aspire to write, and I aspire to see more work where the words mean something more.
Right.
Where I get to spend a moment to say, why did they say that? And I want there to be an answer. I want there to be a reason why I'm asking that question of myself.
Sure.
I find myself writing monologues, and my monologues will veer into the poetic, but I'm not a poet. And I think it's because I have a yearning to write musicals, but I'm not a musician and I don't know how to write songs. But some of my plays have a kind of a structure where something major is happening or the character is getting into a state. And that's when a monologue occurs, and in a musical, that's when it would be
I want moment.
Yeah, it would be a
yes.
song, and in several of my plays, it's because the character is getting fucked up on drugs or is really drunk or has a concussion or something like that, and I'm like, oh, they're concussed. I can use that as the excuse for them to speak poetically.
Exactly. Altered states.
Yeah,
of
exactly.
writing. No, it's fantastic.
So you mentioned the play Down the Street.
Yes.
And the play Down the Street has caught my eye months and months ago because of the support Brimmer Street is giving to my friend's place.
Right.
And I want to talk about that. But first, I just want to say, just to get out of the way, the reason it caught my eye is because when I was a grad student, I wrote a play about runaway teenagers, and while I was writing the play, part of my research was I was checking out organizations around LA, and I found my friend's place, and I went for a site visit, and I spent a couple hours there, and I found it really inspirational, and I found it to be kind of a wonderful place, and I've been a donor since then, and I've been a follower of them just to keep an eye on what they do. And so I noticed that there was a theater company called Ammunition Theater a couple years ago, started to develop a relationship with them. And I was like, oh, that's really great to see a theater connecting with a nonprofit that is not arts related. And that's wonderful. And then Brimmer Street made this announcement.
Yeah.
Which they're giving all of the proceeds, all the ticket sales of your production to my friend's place. And I was like, that's fucking amazing.
It is.
I love that. How did this so what I'm curious about is how I'm not sure if you were part of that or if it was like they just decided to do your play and then behind the scenes they decided to do this, or were you?
Well, it was part of the discussion when they approached me to say we would really like to actually produce your play. And it was the company management's this has been part of their MO to be involved in some aspect with the community. And they saw an opportunity to find a partner with this particular play, since there's 2 teens in this play who are at a kind of crisis point. And I thought that was a fantastic opportunity as well. I work with teenagers, and I was fully on board. And when they found, I think they were talking to a number of service organizations, and they realized that they had the best opportunity with my friend's place. And I believe that it was, my friend's place was, when they contacted my friend's place, there was more of an open door. I mean, they said, fantastic, yes, let's team up. Especially with the subject matter of the play, it made a lot of sense for that to be the partnership.
What is the play about?
The play is about, we have 2 young people, Jordan and Cal. They're both seniors in high school. Jordan is her mother has been, at the start of the play, her mother has been arrested on a third DUI. So Jordan's mom is on a 28-day detox and possibly will have to go to jail. And at this crisis moment, Jordan's mother's boyfriend steps in to help, and there's clearly something else going on with this boyfriend. Cal is a transgender teen who's homeless because his father kicked him out of the house.
Mm-hmm.
And they, circumstances just, they plow into each other, basically. And they find themselves being able to, they find comfort in each other. But it's really about, the play is about what it's like to be a teenager without really firm support, either from your parents or from your school or from your community, and sort of to be at sea. And how do you move forward, and how do you not sink completely? And the play, it was interesting. One of the actors playing Cal said to me in rehearsal the other day during a break, "So why did you write a play with a trans character?" This actor's trans, by the way. And I thought, is JJ mad at me? And I proceeded to, tell the story of how when I was starting the play, one of my students at OSHA came out to me as trans. And at that same time, I was doing a lot of research about teens, runaways, homeless teens. And I learned that a great number of homeless kids are LGBT, but a greater number of those LGBTs there are more trans runaways and homeless teens than there are. And I thought, oh my God, that's heartbreaking. And I realized that I had an opportunity to. Originally, the role of Cal was biologically male, born biologically male. And I thought, well, if I'm going to tell this story, it seemed more fit, more appropriate, more current, more poignant, more acute to make the role trans. And especially having talked with my trans students at OSHA, I thought that it was the right choice. But of course, I had to spend a lot of time educating myself to get in the skin of this character for whom I had very little real-world experience before having, before teaching at high school. I hadn't had a whole lot of experience with the trans community at all. I knew one trans person in my life. Or rather, I was aware of one trans person in my life. I mean, I think there's a lot of people who go through their lives not realizing that they know somebody who's trans.
Sure, yeah.
But I really had to spend a lot of time making sure that doing my best to understand this world before I tried to write about it. So,
was there sort of a light bulb going off, aha moment when you're working on this character where you were like, oh, I feel like I understand this character now?
Well, one of the moments for me was realizing, first of all, why Cal is homeless, and what is driving Cal, but also the real payoff for me was making Cal the hero of the story. When several of my students really wanted to read a play of mine, and I asked them if they wanted to read this play, and they did, so we read it in class. And they were all so happy that Cal, spoiler alert, that Cal doesn't die at the end, because that is something that too often the trans character, the gay character that becomes the victim of the piece. The victimology of the LGBT community is pretty common and pretty unfortunate. Like, that's the only way we can tell these stories, is to have that character be the tragic,
It's a trope.
Yeah, it is a trope. It's a really common trope, and it's an unfortunate trope. And so the fact that Cal becomes the hero was really inspiring to my students. Not that it's a terribly happy story, but that Cal gets to be a force for good. That was important to me. And the other thing that became important to me was a really clear sense of why these two individuals, Cal and Jordan, find a source of hope and inspiration in each other that transcends these labels. That was also important to me, that they are so willing to accept each other without having to explain these things or without having to get over these labels, right? That was a lovely moment for me. I didn't want to have that moment of negotiation with Cal trying to win Jordan over or trying to explain himself to Jordan. That this moment of opening one's arms to the other, that was a really sweet moment for me as a playwright. And I thought, well, if I can do nothing else, maybe that's a good thing to do.
What was it that you were setting out to do when you first started to write the play?
Oh, Lord. When I first started to write the play, the first title of the play was 20 Little Vignettes. And I had a couple of scenes with young people, and that's all I knew, right? It was weirdly experimental for me.
So were you saying to yourself, I want to write a play that is comprised of 20 little vignettes, and there was nothing thematically driving you?
Not at the beginning.
It was just structurally driven?
Part of it was just to allow myself permission to just, like, do something
right.
But again, because I find myself drawn to narrative, the 20 little vignettes turned into something more. And at the time that I was writing this, it was a weird confluence of a bunch of inspirations. At the time that I had started this, I had one of those plate of shrimp moments, and anybody who's seen the movie Repo Man will know what the fuck I'm talking about.
Oh my God, I haven't seen that since I was like 14.
Okay, so the plate of shrimp, right? You see a plate of shrimp, and then you see a sign, plate of shrimp, or you see a sign, a shrimp. Sorry, I'm quoting the movie. So I started to see these articles about all of these massive bird deaths. First, there was the in Beebe, Arkansas, and then I saw another one, and I thought that was really weird, and I started to collect them. And I will do this as a playwright. It's like there will be something that will occur in the news, and I'll start compiling these articles, and I'll compile them in a file. So I had this whole file of articles about massive bird deaths, and I had no idea what the fuck I was doing. I was just collecting them because they were interesting, and I thought I would do something with them, and I didn't know what. And then in the middle of one scene with Jordan, I was like, oh, Jordan is interested in this. It's not for me, it's for Jordan. And so it became Jordan's bizarre obsession with the birds.
I call that gifting to my character.
Yes.
I gift to my character something that I possess or that I obsess over.
So I gifted that to Jordan, and that became a really important key into the play. Then I heard a really great book talk by this guy who wrote this book about Phoenix and how terrible Phoenix is.
The city?
The city. Well, Phoenix, Arizona is a bizarre city.
Yeah, you go there and you're like, I'm not sure why they decided to build a city here. Why did you
Exactly.
stop here? You should have kept going.
Yes.
It's only a few hundred more miles.
Right. And when I was listening to his book talk, I thought, oh my God, of course the play takes place in Phoenix. Of course it does. And so this sense of not just these characters living on the edge of survival, but Phoenix living on the edge of survival.
Right.
All of that sort of fell together and coalesced in the play. And then that became the driving MO of
So
the play.
the play is called And Then They Fall.
And then they fell.
And Then They Fell. Okay. And the artwork is birds. And now that makes sense.
Yes.
That makes sense to me. Were you intentional in your choosing a phoenix in the Phoenix Rising?
Yes.
From the ashes? Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah, that sort of explains the trajectory of that play, where it came from, and how it all happened. And then it, of course, it wasn't just 20 little vignettes, but
Is it a full narrative piece now?
It is. But the other thing that was important to me from the beginning, there are lots of characters, but there are two actors that are choral figures that play lots of different parts. And that was always important to me. And somebody at one point said, well, what if we cast all... And I was like, nope, no. One male chorus plays all of these parts. One female chorus plays all of these parts. And that's important to the storytelling because these adults become sort of interchangeable in their ineptitude. And that is certainly one of the important parts of the story, of how often we fail to stand up for the people who need us to stand up for them.
Do you write about something like... Do you write about that often? Do you write about people who need something, who need help?
Well, that's a really interesting question. I don't know that I'm conscious of doing that, but if you think about what makes good drama, I mean, characters in extremity make for better drama necessarily, I think. That sounds a little bit... That sounds like I'm taking advantage of a particular kind of story, but I just think that it's just true. There are stories that, for me, make more compelling drama than others, and for me, I'm constantly... One thing that is true, I'm thinking consciously about stories that I want to take place on stage, that I want to dramatize. That, especially me, I've been pretty lucky. Socioeconomically, the color of my skin, educationally, I'm a pretty lucky person. I tend not to write about people like me. I'm not really very interesting. There are other people who are far more interesting than me. And I do think that... I've been thinking about this a lot. I think that part of our job as playwrights is to... it's always an exercise in empathy. And I find myself drawn to stories that, for me, politically, it's like, well, I think that's the story people ought to be listening to, not my story. And I don't mean to be exploitative about the stories that I tell, but I do know that those are the stories that I find my brain keeps returning to.
Revealing a truth that people need to experience.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. So I think that that's part of it.
Are there themes you circle back to?
Yeah, I found myself... This was a couple of years ago. There was a play of mine being read. It's one of my favorites. I don't know why people don't want to produce it. It's my favorite. But anyway, in the talk back, somebody asked... so is this play like any of your others? And I started to say, no. And I could see my daughter in the back row going, yes. And later in the car, I said, what are you talking about? This isn't like any of my other plays. And she's like, Mom, come on. In every one of your plays, you have a ghost. You have somebody falling in love with a scientist. And I was like, wait.
That is fantastic.
What? And I was like, oh, shit, you're right. I do. I don't even, first of all, I don't even believe in ghosts, but somehow there's a ghost in one of my plays. And yes, indeed, somebody is always falling in love with a scientist. So apparently this is an important thing to me. And the last time I started writing a play, I was like, I'm definitely not going to have anybody falling in love with a scientist. And then suddenly I was in the middle of a scene. I was like, fuck! She's a scientist! Oh, God. Okay, I guess that's just something I can't escape. So there's that.
I mean, and there's an opportunity for psychoanalyzing you in a major way, too.
Probably. Probably I've always just wanted... I find scientists sexy or something.
Right.
Or I wanted to be a scientist. I want people to be in love with me because I know about science.
Right.
But I do know that I find myself writing a lot about... I do write about science. I think scientists are awesome. But I find myself recently writing a lot about grief. And I know that that's because it's what I'm dealing with myself. Not that I was consciously thinking, I feel like I really need to, purge some demons here and write about grief for a while. It's just, your brain is naturally in a particular place, and it's what your imagination is drawn to.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that is true for me right now. I also find it really interesting to write about characters who make really unfortunate choices.
And I think that, that can manifest in a lot of different ways in plays, but I think that's kind of a vital component of any decent play.
Exactly.
I have a tendency, and it's not even really a tendency. It's more of there's an intention to it. I don't feel particularly intellectual myself, so I don't write about smart people doing smart things, and I think that's another reason why I don't delve into like sci-fi, for example. I write about people who are not particularly smart, not particularly wealthy, who are struggling, and the world is really hard for them. Those are the people that I feel like I can write about because I can empathize with that. And I'm not smart enough to write about smart people saying smart things to other smart people. I can't do that I can't keep that up. It's like juggling. I can juggle for 3 or 2 rounds and then the balls will all fall. That's exactly how the dialogue would be.
But you only have to juggle for a little bit, and then you have to juggle for another little bit. And nobody needs to see the seams of where you stopped juggling.
Where I dropped, where the balls just fell on the floor. Yeah.
I find that I also I find myself reverting back to things that I grew up with, because I'm the pastor's kid, and I grew up in middle class to lower middle class Midwest America. I find myself drawn to characters that I knew growing up, even if they weren't necessarily members of my own family. And I think that's, it's just like the baggage that you take with you, the stuff that you pick up as you go along. I've been thinking about that a lot lately, about the fact that I am drawn to these characters that I like. It's like I'm still turning over the soil of these past experiences and trying to figure them out.
Are you consciously or intentionally writing about yourself?
Probably. I know that I am right now. The current play that I'm writing, I know I'm more conscious of that.
You're in that one?
I'm in it, even though I'm not any one of the particular characters. I know that it's my own particular question that I'm trying to answer in the play.
What's
it's about legacy. It's about what we inherit. And this question of, is there an inevitability to a kind of a familial dysfunction, right? Is, I know that we inherit things, of course, in our DNA, our hair color, our skin color, our predisposition to heart disease, right? All of these things. But are there other things that we inherit? Are they inevitable, or is the way that we were raised? For example, growing up in Minnesota of Scandinavian descent, there are certain truths about being a Scandinavian Minnesotan. We're nice, but we're not so huggy. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like, and part of that is, of course, it's socialization, of course. But then the more you uncover, it's sort of like the lottery ticket again. It's like, how much do you scratch down and get to a truth of who we are and what we're made of? And when you look at any particular family, there's always any particular family has their own particular dysfunctions. And my question is, how much of those dysfunctions are the way you're socialized, the way you were raised, or how much of those dysfunctions are a kind of an expression of DNA, an expression of biology?
Nature versus nurture.
Exactly.
Right.
But it's interesting and tricky and sometimes totally frustrating. When you look at various family histories, it's like, man, you guys could just not escape fill in the blank,
right,
whatever it was.
Yeah.
And there's a kind of horror to that. And we want to be able to say, no, I am free to, rise above all of that. And then you find yourself making that stupid choice. And it's like, oh, man.
There's also I see for families, there's a sort of dysfunction spectrum. So every family has some level of dysfunction. And my particular family might be way out there on that end of dysfunction. And so I'm drawn to the families that seem so much more put together. But then you get inside there and you see that they've got dysfunction too, but it's more relative to the other side of the spectrum. But we all have it. It just manifests in different ways, I think.
Yeah. So I think the question, I've just been obsessed by these questions of family legacy. So that's where my head has been for a while.
Do you have you have a play, and Then They Fell opens this weekend? And you're working on this other play,
Overburden.
Do you have a third level where there's something else brewing that's happening later?
Yeah, well, it's really just percolating. I've realized this about myself, and I think it's a really good realization that I need to let a play just sort of brew for a while before I even write my first word. Overburden, for example, is a play that sat in the back of my head for about 6 years before I started writing it. And I've learned that it's better for me to put off writing until I absolutely can't stop myself from writing. If I have more of the play figured out, then it makes the first draft much faster. First of all, I have a better plan. But also I think there's a period where you have to figure out, is this a play? I don't know. Is this just an obsession or is it a play? Do I really have something that I'm working with? So yeah, I have a thing right now that's percolating. I'll just say that it involves mermaids, not actual mermaids. not actual mermaids, just the idea of them.
That's just so perfect though, because if I had to guess 100 different words that were about to come out of your mouth,
It wouldn't have
mermaids would never have been one of them, given what we just talked about for the past hour.
Well, okay, here's what I will say. It's like this started at a party. Somebody I know was telling me that what she was about to do was she and her sister were about to go off to this mermaid camp. And I was like, okay, what? You're going to do a what now? And I was totally fascinated. And now it's the plate of shrimp thing. It's like every time I turn around, there's some fucking thing with mermaids. And I'm like, I guess I'm going to write a play about mermaids.
Oh, that's brilliant.
So I have right now, it is so, it is a wee little zygote of an idea, and I have no idea what
I can't wait for it to be birthed, and I can see how you somehow find a way to have a character fall in love with a scientist.
Yes, there we go. Okay, so see, I'm going to probably, in my first draft say no fucking scientists here, and then third draft it's like, oh shit.
The mermaid is a scientist.
Of course, the mermaid is the scientist. Yes, that's probably what's gonna happen.
That sounds like the title.
Oh my god.
I want to end on that.
Okay.
I think that would be awesome to end on mermaids.
Fantastic. Works for me.
Thank you for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for asking me. It's been fun.
I look forward to seeing your work.
Thanks.
All right.
Thank you, Tira, for that conversation. If you are in Los Angeles and you're listening to this in time, please go see her play And Then They Fell, produced by Bremer Street Theater. It runs through September 22nd at Atwater Village Theater. All of the ticket proceeds go to My Friend's Place, which is a vital organization dedicated to helping homeless youth. If you can, please go to their website and find ways to support them. I have seen firsthand the impact they have on kids, and I have been a donor as well. All right, 16 of these interviews are in the can. Thank you for continuing to listen. If you haven't been subscribing to this podcast, please go to iTunes and subscribe now. And while you're there, please leave a comment and rate the show. And help us spread the word if you are so motivated. Thank you to Danny Oliver, LA Stage Alliance, and At This Stage Magazine for producing the show. Thank you to David at JTB Recording Studio in Los Angeles for recording us in this perfectly intimate studio. Thank you for listening. Find us on Twitter at Subtext Podcast. If you want to contact us for any reason, the email is thesubtextpodcast@gmail.com. This is the end. My only friend, the end. Last week's experiment told me only 1% of you listened this far. You 1%ers are my favorite. I'll talk to you next month when I announce my Super Bowl picks.